Hosts on Airbnb, who was your worst guest? I used to travel a lot for work, and I would put my apartment up on Airbnb while I was away. My apartment has a bunch of closets and drawers, which I used to leave empty and at my guest's disposal. However, there is one closet in the bedroom which I kept locked, because it is where I keep my personal belongings. One time a guest left a bad review saying that the place had no storage space, which I was very confused about, until I got home and saw my closet. Dude had tried to open it using brute force. The door was almost pulled off its hinges, and the wood was chipped in some places. The door in question had 2 padlocks, and the perfectly usable closet on the opposite wall was untouched. Story 2. We are live-in hosts, so we are present while guests stay in our spare room. A guest arrived, and immediately announced that they had crap himself during their journey. They then marked us down for cleanliness. Mate, you crap yourself. Also a guest who found a pair of my flip-flops in a wardrobe that they should not have opened, then crap over the bathroom floor, ruining my favorite flip-flops in the process. Also a guest who went out drinking for 10 hours before checking in, meaning I had to collect them from the taxi, put them in bed in the recovery position, check on them when I woke up for work, then call the taxi company on their behalf when it turned out they'd lost their phone. Story 3. Rented out to a group of 4 girls. Turns out they were going partying every day during their stay. I get called one day at 5 a.m. It's the guard from my building telling me there's a passed-out girl in the lobby's couch, puking and pissing herself. None of her friends had gone back to help her. Ruined the couch, obviously. The next day, they send me a message again. Another one of the girls had sprinted to the building stairs and also pissed herself. Commenter. I was new to Airbnb, and my prices was very low. At that time, I was 21, and though it was only boys and girls like me who used it. Signed up pretty much to hang out with people my age, show them the city, have a great time. My first guest was a middle-aged woman who was attending a Robbie Williams concert in the neighbor city. She was very sweet and kind when I talked to her through Airbnb, so I let her use my cheap apartment, in which I live also. She didn't check in before 3 in the morning, and she was very drunk when she arrived. I had work the following morning, so I really felt like sleeping. When I let her inside, she was very noisy. After about 30 minutes, she fell asleep. I was waken up suddenly by her trying to sneak in my bed. Keep in mind she was drunk AF, so it was not very smooth. I asked what she was doing and told her to use the other room. She refused and wanted to cuddle with me, also saying she was willing to pay more. I told her, quite aggressive, to use the other room or leave. At the point, she simply got mad at me. After about 15 minutes, she busts the door open and comes in the room trying to sell me some of her organic product called Vitamin Plus or something. I was furious. She kept going for about 1 hour before they almost fell asleep in the door opening. She gave me 5 stars. Story 4. A friend of mine rented to a girl who was convinced that there were cameras hidden all around the unit. She dismantled the lighting fixtures, picture frames, medicine cabinets, remote controls, etc. Edit. This occurred in 2015. They were live-in hosts, renting out the main part of their home. She also depotted plants, removed smoke detectors, hid all of the refrigerator magnets, and destroyed her cell phone. They were compensated by Airbnb. Thank you, Reddit, for an excuse to reach out to an old friend. Commenter. They had an Indian wedding without telling us. The place was trashed. Stank like curry. They left a hot iron on the kitchen table and left a burn mark. There was pizza face down and smashed into the carpet of the kids' room. Garbage in the pool. Trash all over the yard. Never again. Story 5. I worked in a call center that handles some of Airbnb's customer service. So one guest murdered 2 people in the host's home and got arrested there. Another guest was from a culture that eats iguanas and barbecued up a 7-year-old girl's pet iguana to serve to the family as thanks for hosting him. Another guest filled a mug with human crap and left it in the host's microwave. You really lose all faith in humanity working in customer service call centers. Editing to add, Airbnb requires photo evidence for all host complaints. And guess who is the first to see them? The initial customer service agent, who may only be on their first or second day taking calls. And the iguana man was forced to pay for both a new barbecue for the family and a replacement iguana. Story 6. My friend's Airbnb guest taught their kitten to meow once, and then the quietest sweet needy cat turned loud and needy. 'Twas a curse that kept on giving long after he left. Commenter. I had 2. The first was actually an Airbnb exec who messaged me saying that he had stayed in my building before. His brother lives in the building as well and would be in and out with no issues. My apartment was a $2,000 per month luxury 1-bedroom in a major city with doorman, etc. When the guest arrived, he messaged me to complain that the building location was too noisy. The bed wasn't comfortable, and that he wants to end his stay early. I agreed to let him leave early within the terms of the listing. He ended up disputing the charges, got refunded, and left me my first review with less than 5 stars, which made my account ineligible for superhost status. My second incident was a few people who were coming in for a conference. Long story short, they had a party and trashed my apartment. Toilet was a mess, holes in the walls, stained the carpet, etc. A few $1,000s in damage. When I found out about this, I had another guest coming the next day. I contacted Airbnb about the incident, who was more concerned about if I was going to be able to get the apartment ready for the next guest. They guaranteed me that they would repair all the damage. I just had to submit photos as proof. I got the apartment cleaned up and ready for the next guest. When I filed my claim with Airbnb, I was told that since I hosted another guest after the incident, I was unable to file a claim. I fought this for a little while, but got nowhere, and just left the guest a negative review. A few months later, I got a notification from Airbnb that they were removing my negative review of the guest who trashed my apartment. I'm no longer an Airbnb host. Story 7. My wife and I were hosts for about a year to make ends meet. We had just moved to a new town so she could attend grad school. Guests had full access to the second floor while we lived on the first. Met a lot of cool people and ended up getting superhost status. Last guests we ever had were an older couple that had traveled a lot. They seemed fine, and we had a nice conversation, and they seemed fine with the accommodations. Keep in mind, up until this point, we had never gotten less than 5 stars from dozens of guests. Later that night, I was at my job bartending. Busy evening, and homeboy rolls up saying he needs to talk with me outside. I hurry out trying to accommodate him and also get back to my busy shift. He proceeds to lay into me at my place of work about how our space wasn't up to Airbnb standards and they won't be staying there, and some friends found them another place to stay that night. I was confused, but okay, sure. But I'll give you the full refund you're asking for. He goes on his way. We refund everything we had gotten from them. Airbnb did not refund the taxes and fees per their own terms and conditions. I think his main complaint ended up being a spider web under the bed and that there wasn't AC upstairs. Mountain town on the east coast of us in the summer. It was warm, but there were fans and it wasn't unbearable. I can understand why he'd want to stay somewhere else, though. Anyways, we think it's all behind us, and my wife and I embark on a cross-country road trip a few days later to check out the country and go see her family on the west coast. First day, the guy starts blowing us up through Airbnb messaging, saying he didn't get all his money back and to send him the rest. We had returned all the money we got. We told him to take up the rest with Airbnb and that we couldn't help him. He was flipping out saying we were bad at business, and there were other avenues to get him his money back like Venmo and some other crazy stuff, to the point we had to contact Airbnb to take care of it, so he would stop contacting us. He basically wanted us to pay him for taking away our opportunity to make some money off other guests that weekend, and for him to insult us and our home. It was a crazy stressful situation at the beginning of a long trip and influenced us to find a roommate instead of continuing with Airbnb hosting. We also had a dude and his girlfriend, who were probably in their late 40s, get absolutely hammered. Come back around midnight and she was throwing up in the yard while he laid on our living room floor with our dog talking junk about his girlfriend and asking us for weed. They were all right, but left about 40 empty cans up in the room for me to clean up. Story 8. Not my story, but a friend of mine's. He has an apartment in London, an urban area with dense houses and population. The apartment he hosted has this window facing Main Street, which people tend to assume it's non-see-through, but it's not. So the guy who stayed in it decided to sit in front of that naked and had a few beers, overlooking the great view. He must have fallen asleep or something, and everyone passing by the road just had to see this poor creature. It was all on Snapchat at the time I recall El Mao. This has really blown up, so let me clarify a few things. The area I refer to is in the context of where the apartment is and not the whole of London in general. In that sense, the population per SQKM here would be extremely high. He sat on a couch, right in front of the see-through window to have his beers, just like anyone would do. The window used to be non-see-through until it had sustained some damage from a nearby construction site, forcing them to repair immediately without thorough checking. This is where the whole new feature of see-through was born. Lastly, this incident at the time was overshadowed by another weird event in London called the Naked Bike Day. You can look up what this is, please, only above 18. I'm still under the impression that he may have come to London to take part in this event and perhaps assumed people of London are more tolerable towards nudity. Thanks. Story 9. I hosted for a few years as a super host, and frankly, I had lovely guests. Very cool, intelligent, well-traveled, interesting people from all over the world. They were all pretty tidy too and considerate. The only annoying thing was people who talked way too much. Normally, people would exchange pleasantries and we'd chit-chat for a bit, which is totally fine and welcome. But every once in a while, I'd get a guest who talked non-stop from the time they got in until they went to bed. The rental suite was fantastic, like its own separate apartment, fully stocked with everything I would want if I were a guest. And yet, there were a few people who had to hang out on my floor and talk. When I got an overtalker, sometimes I would hide when I heard them coming, so they'd go ahead to their floor. BC. I just could not stand someone talking at me from 7 p.m. until 11 p.m. Story 10. My mom did this. She had some people from out of country come stay. They moved the furniture around, swapped and mulched mattresses, left a massive pile of dishes in the kitchen. The bathroom was all buggered, and they must have been cooking and smashing clams or oyster shell in and around the BBQ outside. I went over to help my mom out a little after work for a bit. but it was a 2-day minimum cleanup job she had to do. Mom even had to bring in a cleaner lady to help as well. Needless to say, the people who stayed didn't get their deposit back and got a file reported on them. Story 11. I'm embarrassed to say that I was not the host in this story. Me and my mate went out on a pub crawl in Prague during our gap year. I don't enjoy clubbing, and the last venue on the crawl was a club, so I cut slightly earlier than my mate. Around 1 a.m., I got back into our apartment and went to bed. I was woken up by my friend at 4 a.m., and the entire kitchen was flooded. Not even exaggerating, there was like a ducking inch of water lining the floor, spewing rapidly out of a broken overhead pipe. I asked him WTF happened, and he claimed he had woken up standing in it. Being unfamiliar with the house, I didn't know where the choke point in the pipe was to cut it off. We called the guy who owned the place, which was painstakingly slow given the time. We managed to get through to a family member who then contacted him. He arrived about 15 minutes later, in which time the water issue has become even worse. We had sealed off the room using a heap of towels to minimize the water leaving the kitchen as it had tile floors while the rest of the house was hardwood. But this made it accumulate to about ankle height. The kitchen also had a sunken floor. Up until about 6 or 7, we were using pots to clear the indoor swimming pool from what used to be the kitchen. I didn't look like it had done a horrendous amount of damage once we were finished, but I imagine the water seeped through the floor and into the walls, causing all sorts of damage. What makes it worse is that it was a third-floor apartment. My friend, being the one who originally found it, told the Airbnb property owner that it was like that when he woke up, but later told me that although he can't remember it, he thinks what must have happened is he'd wandered in from the club blackout drunk and tried to do a pull-up on the pipe. That said, though, he wasn't wet when he woke me, so who knows what happened. I felt really bad for the host. Story 12. This is a long one. Sorry. This story was a long time ago. I'd like to preface this by saying that we generally have good reviews and kind guests who don't have any problems agreeing to our 3 rules. Close the gate, try not to come upstairs before 10 a.m. and after 8 p.m., and notify us if you are coming upstairs. These 2 girls stayed in our basement seemed like your typical uni students. They told us about their yoga retreat and made jokes upon arriving before we showed them how to close and lock the gate so our dogs were safe. They said they understood, closed and opened the gate a few times properly, and went downstairs. The next morning, my mother let our dogs outside, not thinking much of it. About 30 minutes go by and the dogs haven't asked to come back in yet, so she goes to check on them and they aren't in our yard. She goes to check the gate. It's wide open. One of our dogs is super easy to catch when he gets out because he immediately goes to the front porch and waits for my mom to let him in. Our other dog is a whole different story. She is a rescue with severe trauma and no trust in strangers. She will run like a maniac until she sees either me or my mom, which makes her very difficult to catch. We eventually got both dogs inside and told the guests to close the gate when they got back. Next morning, I let them out for a second, but then I thought that I'll just be safe and check the gate. It is once again open. Our rescue dog has already bolted out the gate and down the street. She hadn't gotten far, so I just went through the alley to get in front of her and got her back inside. I was a little pissed at this point. I closed the gate and left a note on it that read, "Please close gate," with simple instructions on how to close in case they had forgotten. It's around 9 p.m. when they get back. I wasn't exactly going to sleep yet, but I was turning off the downstairs lights and getting water when they come upstairs, hour after they are not supposed to, yelling about how I need to get my head out of my ass. It is now 2 adults screaming at a teenager because they couldn't follow one of the 3 rules we have. I'm more than a little pissed now, but I try to remain calm and explain that we have to keep our dogs safe. They calm down after a while, agree to close the gate, and go downstairs. The next morning, I come downstairs around 6 in the morning to find the girls had left the gate wide open and tore up my note. I was mad, but I just closed the gate and let the dogs out. It was the day they were going to leave anyway, so I figured that I'd just put up with them until they left. Most of that day was actually normal and uneventful. They just left until I went downstairs to clean up. They had totally reached the place, took all the dishes off the shelf and put them on the floor, took all of the books out of the bookcase, poured coffee on the counter, and turned furniture upside down. They even hid the remotes. It took me forever to clean, and I'm still salty about it to this day. I'd like to add my favorite guest story to balance this out a bit. Basically, the guest had a kid, 7 or 8. Said kid comes upstairs at about 3 a.m. to be greeted by me sitting on the kitchen floor, eating pizza rolls. Her mom came to get her and apologized profusely. They were super nice and just went back downstairs for the night. Told her. Guests left the gate open multiple times after being asked to close it, trashed the place in spite for being asked to close the gate. Man, I hate people. Story 13. A bit late to the party, but I have 2. One dude stole my trimmer. This other guy took the cake, though. When I took him the second key to the apartment that his mother needed, he opened the door slightly ajar and only extended his hand, palm facing up, to receive the key. Didn't want to shake my hand. Sent me messages complaining to me that drawers in the bathroom were full of personal stuff. One was full of items that we purposefully leave for guests to use, including new pads, soaps, toothbrushes. He was annoyed by this and said, "I'll just move this to one of the bedside tables in the master bedroom, shall I?" Which is also full anyway. There, we leave blocks and pens for guests to use, as well as reading material like The Economist or guides to the city. This also annoyed him. He also complained about food that we leave for guests to partake of and be welcomed by. Upon leaving, Guy leaves a massive, scathing review, including hot takes like the linens and pots being worn out and needing replacement. They're not and they don't. They're also top of the line. Says the apartment was dirty upon entering. It wasn't. It was thoroughly cleaned before his arrival, as it is before every guest's arrival. He concludes by complaining the taxi ripped him off. I'm guessing the insinuation is that I was in cahoots with the taxi company? I don't know. His mother was nice, though. I often wonder how parents who give birth to ducking idiots feel about said ducking idiots. Story 14. Not a host, but I stayed at an Airbnb that rented 2 rooms. I was in bed and hear the other guest, a man and women, return. They're loud and drunk, but nothing crazy. About 10 minutes later, I hear what I thought was them having sex, but then quickly realize it's someone getting hit. The host and I both hear this. The host starts knocking on the door, asking what's going on and to open the door. The woman opens the door and her lip is split wide open. She's bleeding all down her shirt. The guy is in the room but runs out with a backpack and leaves. He's taken both of their cell phones and wallets. The police show up and everyone gives statements. They found him walking down the road and he found different accommodations at the police station. I slept fine. The room was Harry Potter themed, so I still left 5 stars. Story 15. Before reading this comment, I'd like to explain that it's probably NSFW or appropriate to read if you are sensitive. This is just an honest response to the question posted. I used to own several hostels in Mexico. During the low season, we would create pages for our private rooms. American art student moves in. Nobody ever sees her. She often appears around 1 a.m. to eat noodles and watch SpongeBob with night porter. Fast forward 5 months, and she decides to live at the hostel. The city is doing really bad visitor numbers due to the cartel cutting a bunch of heads off and leaving them in the city center freeway. So I get a call one day. The manager of the hostel explains the guest won't move room, we were redecorating, and had mentioned previously we would be asking to temporarily move room. No objections from her, happy vibes. This turns into a 2-day thing. The manager calls me. She explains the guest won't move to another room. I explain the decorators need to work around it till she moves room. Day 4, the manager asks her to leave room. She declines, and then the manager explains we would have to call police. Police arrive. Cop was an awful man and complained the room smelled of crack. As they forced the door open, the furniture she stacked up against the door fell down. We could hear it crashing down in the room. They call in the fire department who cut the bars in on the window. She had been pregnant all along and was receiving substances from her boyfriend daily. He would deliver them to her window. In the room, she had given birth to a baby and then pushed the baby under the bed. She also had 4 fans on the floor on full power, which dried up all the blood on the floor and the birth. A side drawer that had been stacked on top of the furniture against the door had fallen directly on her, her head pulling part of her face off. She survived with an awful scar on the side of her face, but she was completely destroyed by drug use. Story 16. My partner looks after an Airbnb for his friend, self-catering only. The house is an 1800s big country house. It is used primarily for large get-togethers and parties. Most guests are great and clean up well to get their deposit back. A group stayed and left the place pretty messy, but we couldn't figure out what the smell was. Turns out they left a full pig in a rubbish bag under the kitchen table. They tried to cook a pig on a spit and basically left its mainly raw corpse under the table. Every toilet was destroyed too. Must have eaten the semi-charred meat on the outside of the pig when drinking without realizing that it was ducking raw. Sorry, Gordon Ramsay. Story 17. Not a host was a guest. We stayed in a carriage house that was split into 2 apartments in Savannah. The host was the most wonderful Southern personality I've ever encountered. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a loud banging noise, like someone trying to break down a door. It got loud and louder and eventually sounded violent. This went on for 20 minutes before my GF got out of bed and politely asked the neighboring guests to be quiet. They remained quiet for another 20 minutes, and then they were at it again, this time much louder. Drunkenly, they locked themselves out and decided that breaking the door down was their only option. The next morning when we left, the deadbolt was knocked out. The entire doorframe was stripped off and the door was smashed to bits. We felt so bad for the host. It was going into a holiday and she had to cancel the next guest's stay because of the damage. Stupid drunk college kids. Story 18. Not my house per se, but my mother's house. We had recently started when this happened, so it was kind of surprising. And also, some backstory is necessary. Our house had 2 floors, one with a kitchen and office, and one with the bedrooms. We had recently redone the 2nd floor to make it more suitable to the guests, but especially in the master, which we had a steam shower installed, a bath, and a bidet on the toilet. Anyways, back to the story. The people called and seemed relatively normal people from Texas or Kansas or somewhere, but they kept calling us with complaints, so me and my brother had to go over and do a ton of random crap for them, which was annoying but had happened a few times with our first few guests, so we thought nothing of it, even though some requests were pretty idiotic, such as asking how to open the fridge. Yes, opening a fridge. Anyways, after the last stupid question complaint, a few days passed, and they left early because their uncle or some family member came down with something. I can't remember what. Usually we had a maid come to clean the house, but she called saying the house was too nasty for me to clean, so me and my brother go out to the house to see what the fuss was all about. Downstairs seemed fine, about as messy as the other guests leave it, but the problem, however, was upstairs. We walked my old bedroom, and it was completely trashed, like dressers on the ground, pillows and blankets everywhere, and for some reason, a tiny doll, which appeared to have had the clothes torn off of. So we were annoyed and cleaned it up, but then I walked into the bathroom, and there was, I kid you not, 2 piles of crap, human feces next to the toilet. Who just craps on the floor by the toilet? And we went over to the master bedroom, which was surprisingly clean, except for the bathroom, which had towels everywhere, and another pile of crap by the toilet and one inside the damn steam shower, our precious steam shower, which was the best shower I had ever used, by the way. This has been my worst experience with a guest. We didn't return their damage deposit. Oh, also the craps were from an adult, not a baby or child. TL, Dr. Weird Person took crap. Got hit edit. Lotta likes Lamau. Story 19. I've never hosted, but I stayed one night at this place in San Bruno near Esfo. Cheap little shared place just to be close to the airport for an early-ass flight. The guy was extremely particular about cleanliness, and I get it. I do. But for someone who makes you take your cess courts off at the door, he should really consider cleaning under the goddamn bidet once in a while. I'd never used one before, didn't know how to, and was way too tired to try to figure it out. But I'm glad I didn't. Anyway, with everything looking so immaculately clean, the smell of stale piss and crap coming from the toilet really threw me for a loop. You know that smell? It's like stale poop. I bent over and looked at the underside of whatever part of the bidet was within the rim of the toilet and, yep, apparently never cleaned. I really wanted to leave a bad review because of that, but we arrived like an hour late and didn't give any warning and felt bad about that, so I didn't. Story 20. Co-hosted a superhost Airbnb fit about 4 years. Never had any crazy property damage or violent guests, but there was this one time. There was a group of girls in town for a bachelorette party who were also nurses. They stayed without any problems and seemed to clean up all right after themselves, suffer from the obligatory overflowing recycling, alcohol bottles, etc. That is until I saw a weird speckle on the duvet. It looked like someone had flicked red paint, and I figured it was blood and went to get some hydrogen peroxide before bleaching. But as I looked up, I noticed another small smattering on the blinds, then the door, and the wall. Each one was almost too small to detect if you weren't paying attention, but they had my attention now, so I proceeded through the whole house. White BTW for easier cleaning bleaching between guests, on a magical mystery tour of tiny blood splatters. Furniture, blinds, sheets, tables, walls, you name it. The trail encompassed the whole house. It wasn't until I got to the bathroom that I deciphered what must have happened. There, in the bathroom in the trash, were used syringes, IVs, and tubes. Ask covered in blood and boldly greeting me with no lining. Having several friends in the medical industry who also like to drink, I was aware that they sometimes employ the help of a saline drip to sober up. Well, these ladies must have been slammed because they could not figure out how to get those IVs in and created a Jackson Pollock of bad decision juice all over the house as they fumbled to destroy the evidence of their bender. Took me all day to find and bleach everything. Had to cancel the next guest because I was so paranoid that I hadn't gotten to and sanitized every inch of that house. That was enough to ban bachelorette parties forever. Story 21. Not an Airbnb owner, but can tell the story from the other side of things. My grandfather, his wife, her adult children, a dog and a child of one of the adults stayed in the Cotswolds in a stunning and peaceful village-based Airbnb. My mother and I were invited to stay, but my mother declined to stay in the same Airbnb because she doesn't get along with the rest of them very much. She rented elsewhere nearby and visited them briefly. We showed up and were disgusted by the state of the place. The kid had been left to sit in his crap, which had leaked out and was spilling onto the carpet as his dad was fast asleep and drunk on the sofa next to him. The dog hadn't been taken for a single walk and had simply been let out into the back garden to crap everywhere. There was crap literally right outside the back door on the step. None of them had known how to light the wood burner properly, so they'd made a complete mess of ash in the front room. The kitchen was a complete state because they'd done nothing but drink and make messes and spill things on the floor and down the walls and cupboards. The dog had chewed a bunch of stuff up and smashed a vase. There were dirty nappies crammed into the bathroom bins and left to stink the place out. I was honestly embarrassed to be even vaguely related to them and really disgusted at them. Felt really bad for the owners of the place and asked Mom if we should let the owners know, but she didn't want to stir up a fuss and alienate them further before they'd had a chance to clean up after themselves upon leaving. Not sure how they'd get the crap and ash out of the carpet, fix the vase, and mend the chewed up things, but I left it because I was 15. Story 22. Friend of mine rents out his basement, so he tends to hear a lot of fight sex with the couples that stay with him. Had a couple times where he thought he was going to have to call the cops. Had a couple times where he wouldn't return the security deposit because of bloody stains on bed sheets and honest-to-God crap stains down the wall. His two favorites to tell are the sex stories, of course. He had one couple who had sex every night at 9:30, 11:30, and 1:30, and then again in the morning at 8 and 9:30. Every night, exact same times like the dude set an alarm for it. But the best part, they had sex for 15 seconds every time. It would be bang, 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 and then that was it. The other couple, he thought he was going to have to call the cops on because the guy would be screaming horrible, disgusting things at his girlfriend. Stupid. That all you got? Ducking git? You're ducking useless. Etc., etc. Apparently, my friend was so distressed that he sat up all night listening just in case he heard the girl cry or scream or anything. Next morning, couple is as happy as can be, all smiles and joking together, like the best loving couple. That night, same thing. Ducking git, escort, useless cow. Next morning, happy couple. Third night, same routine. But this time, he hears a loud crash and the girl cry out. Friend rushes downstairs, crashes through the door, ready to beat the crap out of this guy, only to see him strapped down on the bed, ass in the air, girlfriend on the floor wearing the biggest strap-on I've ever seen, and a brown stain all over the bed. Apparently, she just slipped off the bed, which was the crash he heard, and what made her cry out was the amount of poop that exploded out of this guy's ass when the strap-on was ripped out. They didn't ask for their security deposit back. Story 23. English is not my first language. Sorry in advance for any mistakes. I live in a 4-bedroom apartment in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and I rent 2 bedrooms via Airbnb. In the last 8 years, I've hosted people from all over the globe, mostly for long stays, 1 month or more. Had some weird guests, like a guy from Portugal that stayed 6 months and only ate Cheetos, and a French girl that would eat rotten bananas because she likes how creamy they got, and some awesome ones, but only one was actually a bad person for me. It was a 50-plus woman that came to town for some culinary lessons with an important chef and would be staying for about 2 months in my guest room. She seemed okay on the first day, before she started freaking out randomly on the second day. She went to my bedroom 4 or 5 times to ask me about conveniences on the neighborhood, markets, banks, bakeries, and such. I politely handled her a complete guide I made for my guests, but she wouldn't leave me alone for more than 5 minutes, being rude and saying she didn't know how to read maps and that I should give her the instructions verbally. She then got crazily angry when I told her I didn't know any evangelic churches nearby. I'm not religious. I told her I could help her Google it, but she just went outside slamming all the doors in the apartment. I then got a call from the building keeper saying that she was at the entrance of the building asking everyone about the church and harassing some people, even a mother with a baby. The woman was insane. I immediately called Airbnb and expressed my concerns about her not being mentally stable. They were super helpful and called her explaining that I had a personal issue and couldn't go on with the hosting. The woman went crazy, came back to the apartment yelling at me and hitting stuff, had to lock my dog on my bedroom while she got her bags because she tried to kick him. Story 24. I cleaned for one, saw some guests pull in, 7 people get out. Several things wrong with that. The car could only seat 5. When they booked, they said there were only going to be 2 guests staying there. They complained the whole time they were there about how things didn't work. Wasn't true. Thankfully, I never cleaned up after the 7 people. The place also only had 3 bedrooms. Story 25. I've been pretty lucky. I have had some really awesome guests. I ran a live-in where I rented my 2nd bedroom and I ran my house I was hoping to be able to pay for. I will say this. Canadians are not nearly as nice and seemly as they are made out on TV. I found them to be very demanding and hard to please, willing to treat you like a nephew servant over anything respectable. But I'm an American, so I don't care, just give me your money. So this old Canadian couple stays with me for a few days. The first night he comes to my apartment very late without texting. I always wait, unless we have word. Comes in, getting about the parking. At my huge apartment complexes in the middle of the #1 vacation destination on the planet. The parking lot is ducking massive, like multiple football fields behind one row of buildings. Massive, can't miss it. So I tell him that if you turn right, there is an unbelievable parking lot right behind there. Point to the row. We laugh, go to bed. The next night at about 2 a.m., he and his wife come home drinking, buzzy, hot, loudly talking through my bedroom door. They had to park in handicap parking because I couldn't provide parking. If they got towed, I'm going to pay for it, or they're going to give me a 1-star review and get Airbnb involved. I debated if I was going to have to get in a fight or shoot someone. I was like, duck. Then I said, just give me your keys. I told you there was a ducking huge parking lot across the row behind those buildings. Ducking massive parking lot. Anyway, I moved his car at 2 a.m., sent him away in a.m. He gave me a 1 star. Story 26. I let some casual acquaintances stay in my London place when I flew back to the States for a few weeks, before Airbnb. I had known the family before, and the husband and I got along great at work. Just told them to give my house key to the porter when they left. Came back too. Furniture in the sitting room, living room completely rearranged. This also included the TV and computer setup. Master bedroom, the bed was moved to another location. Reorganized my kitchen completely. They moved my glassware, plates, food, and pantry to different locations. Found in the way back some expensive porcelain that had been chipped and damaged. Said porcelain had already been stored away. I guess they decided to use it and broke it, then hid it. Moved my car from my assigned parking spot, huge deal, onto the street without getting a parking permit so they could park their car in my spot. There was guest parking, but they didn't like it and decided to move my car instead. The car had been parked in a no parking zone and was towed to another street. Spent half a day wandering the neighborhood trying to find it. Had to pay a massive fine for the towing and lack of street permit. I asked them for compensation for the fine since they moved my vehicle without asking and was told, not our problem. Had to go to the borough office and show proof I was out of the country the entire time, and part of the fine was dropped, but not all. That was about $500 USD out of pocket after some of the fines were dropped. Left wet sheets in the washing machine and they were mildewy when I returned. Rearranged my wardrobe. Legit rearranged and refolded all of my clothes. Opened a drawer expecting my underwear and socks. Nope, had to go searching for them. Seriously pissed off neighbors and an equally upset porter. Story 27. Not my home or on Airbnb. My parents rented their house, PA, childhood home, after they relocated to Y. They rented to 2 families over the course of a few years. Less than 5 years. After the second tenants left, my parents asked if one of the 3 of us would move there so they could still keep the house. Mortgage was paid off at this point. My older bro and Sil moved in shortly after and have been there ever since. Some of the damages include drilling holes through exterior bricks so they could put cable in each of the bedrooms, trimmed several trees and cut down my mom's weeping willow tree that was an anniversary gift from my dad, from my destroyed brand new carpet that was installed in the finished basement by allowing their many cats to piss all over the floor. My parents were fine with pets. They charged an additional fee, but I think put a cap on hash of pets allowed. Anyway, they had to have the carpet shampooed, and I happened to be in the area at the time, so they had me check to see if it still smelled. It still smelled okay, but it was still freshly cleaned, so wasn't sure if all the cat urine was removed. Older bro checked a few days later when he was in the area and said it still smelled, so they ended up replacing the carpet once again. The carpet that was replaced originally had been there for 18 years, and the new carpet lasted less than 5. I'm sure there's more that I don't recall. I asked my dad if he was going to sue or anything, and he said it wasn't worth the time, dollar, or effort to have to fly back and forth for court appearances. They just kept all of their security deposits. Story 28. There are almost too many to recall, but among the top ones was a bridesmaid who got drunk at a wedding and proceeded to violently assault her boyfriend BC he wouldn't propose. She threw him into 3 walls, all requiring extensive repairs, which led to her arrest. The quality of guests has declined sharply as Airbnb has grown. Story 29. I used Airbnb to rent out a military camper truck I built. I only had 1 guest and 1 horrible experience. I will never be a host again. The first guest was on B&B for a couple years and had a few reviews from hosts that were good. Anyways, the guest forced open my RV gate, parked his vehicle in my backyard, and then 3 more guests, only 1 guest was booked, and a dog, I had a no pet policy, proceed into my motorhome. The next day comes and it's time for them to leave, but they won't leave. I had to sit outside the door and wait for them to get ready. They begged to stay, but I had a very strong feeling something was wrong. Inside, I found very short straws with burnt ends and burned aluminum foil around the camper. I figured out that they were probably freebasing heroin. They also managed to completely fill up the gray water tank and black water tank. Later, I found out that the rental car was most likely stolen and they were hiding it from the police. Airbnb was pathetic in the lack of customer support during the experience and after. Story 30. These ladies got locked out because all 3 didn't bring any of the spare keys. I had to leave a meeting since they demanded I let them inside. Since I left them all spares in my original, had to climb up 2 stories by building a makeshift Marv from Home Alone-style stack of boxes and break in my own apartment to open the door from the inside for them. They gave me my only negative rating out of about 20. Story 31. Not my cabin, but in Tayscourt, they did something with Airbnbs where people could offer them to people affected by the Paradise Fire. My friend's family, out of the kindness of their heart, opened their cabin, and someone who apparently hadn't even been affected by the fire used a fake name, and they stripped the cabin of anything that could be seen as valuable. His grandpa's ice axe, snow sescorts, all kinds of other old stuff like that. They even took all the pots, pans, silverware, plates, everything. Story 32. My friend owns an Airbnb place. Really nice two-bedroom house. Always has guests. Highly rated. He had a group of young adults book the place. They were only there for 2 nights. On the first night, he had a noise complaint from his neighbors, so he went round to talk to them the following morning. When he got there, he found at least 20 people in the house and around the house passed out. The house was pretty much destroyed. Broken tables, broken chairs, smashed windows. He found puke, crap, and beers bottles everywhere. He went around waking everyone up and telling them all to leave. He contacted Airbnb to tell them the situation. A few days later, he had an email from Airbnb stating that his place had been suspended from the site due to allegations that he was accused of inappropriate behavior towards some of the female members. Luckily, some of the guests came forward and apologized, saying that nothing like that happened. Some of the other guests were trying to get out of paying the fines, so made up the story. My friend went through hell for months. Story 33. Not us, but one of our neighbors. They've bought a house that is adjacent to ours and have hosted it as an Airbnb. We've had a lot of interesting people who've lived there. There's one group, a man, his GF, and his friend. They had fights constantly. Xmas for us had been very eventful because of them. They fought 2 days before, and the GF stormed out of the house cursing up a storm. The two followed her and caught and carried her back to their apartment. They fought for a while, and the GF ran away at night. On Christmas Day, we were heading out to buy groceries when we heard them questioning the girl aggressively. We, my mom, my bro, and I, shared a look and proceeded on with our business. That night, they fought by the stairs, which escort their voices. With the way our complex is built, all the houses could hear them. Eventually, our neighbor came there and kicked them out. These people were foreigners and had stayed there for a month. They couldn't believe it, but they complied. They packed up and left the next day. They had a really bad Christmas. I felt bad for them because they couldn't find a place on such short notice. But since my neighbor dealt with evictions seriously, they didn't have a choice. Story 34. We lived in a basement suite where the owners upstairs would Airbnb their home every summer to help pay for their vacation. Personally, I never understood the allure of renting out all your personal belongings and personal space to strangers, but whatever. So anyway, one summer they're away, and the Airbnb guests are supposed to arrive a few days later. A couple days go by, and a duck and asterisk, family asterisk, arrives and are standing out on the front lawn just waiting around for who knows what. After a while, I hear a crashing noise, and the dad is breaking into the house, but into our suite in the basement through our bedroom window. I was like, what the duck are you doing? He explained to me they showed up earlier than they were supposed to and didn't have the keys yet. WTF? So I guess that means breaking into the house you're renting? But through the basement, which you were even told was a separate suite? What the duck? They were loud for the whole week. They were there, and they apparently didn't understand how the garbage and recycling worked. We moved 2 years ago. Our landlords upstairs were great, but I didn't like how every summer they'd turn the upstairs into a glorified hotel, and who knows who we'd be stuck with while they were away. Story 35. This story, one client told me he had a traveling job, so he used to give his home. Once he gave out his home to a couple, a 29, 30-year-old husband and wife. After he returned from his tour and entered the house, he found everything neat and clean and in more than a perfect condition, except one thing. His property is 2-bedroom hall and kitchen. He said that there was some really bad and foul smell. He thought it might be coming from outside, so he sprayed some freshener and went to his room. But on third day, it became even worse. He tried to check, and then he opened the other room. Room was nice and clear, but smell there was very strong. He opened the closet. In the bottom, most section of closet, he found something that was spine-chilling and shocking. There were some occult symbols, and on one of that was a dyed pigeon covered with vermilion. Some tantra or black magic happened there, and then he had to spend few bucks on dealing with that occult. Story 36. Rented out my lake house to an older couple who will be having their 2 adult children visit for a week. They didn't know that my in-laws own the house next door and were there. It turns out 9 cars and 25 people in their 20s showed up, so my father-in-law called me. I couldn't get there until the next morning, and by then they had ripped apart my furniture, put a hole in a wall, scattered broken glass and trash all over the lawn, tore down my fire pit, and someone had broken into my locked storage shed and stolen a $1,200 electric trolling motor. Story 37. Not as colorful as many, but had an Italian lass stay in my flat once, and she was crackers. She claimed it was filthy and bought all new bed sheets and paper plates, despite the fact we had our regular cleaner in the day before. I've since learned that Italians are obsessive cleaners. Really pissed me off as we went out of our way to welcome her with a list of local amenities and attractions written in Italian by an Italian pal. Story 38. My parents recently had an incident. The house was rented by someone using a false identity. They threw a huge banger at the house with underage guests, and according to neighbors, there were guests having sex in the yard. We ended up finding out after several guests broke into the neighborhood pool and broke the fence and a window at the community building, leading to the cops being called. The house was trashed. cigarettes and joints all over, alcohol spilled on the floors in nearly every room, broken cell phones, over $100 worth of food they bought left out. They broke into the locked cabinet that had cleaning supplies and extra linens in it. We found all of the kitchen knives in the bedroom closet, as well as cut-up bars of soap. Luckily, the damage to the house was fairly minimal. Screens from the windows popped out, small hole in the wall, broke the locked cabinet, pulled washing machine out from the wall. People are ignorant. Story 39. Never hosted, but I stayed at a rental house a few years back while visiting my wife's family out of town. We stayed at this nice little cottage-style house with plenty of amenities. There was a hot tub, BBQ, nice outdoor patio area, etc. We didn't use any of it because we were only there to sleep. We get home and receive an email from the owner that she's keeping the security deposit because we destroyed the BBQ and broke several deck boards on her patio. She didn't believe that we hadn't even touched these areas. There was plenty of back and forth before she agreed to drop it and give back 90% of the deposit. Story 40. My parents rented our second home to 3 families that were part of a soccer tournament, 6 adults and 5 children. When we came to the house after they left, we discovered that they ruined the wood floor by having leaking coolers sit on it. The damage to the floors costed over $600 plus. Not to mention they left dirty diapers, just laying on the floor or on random shelves, not a single one in the many trash cans around the house. And lastly, they raided the pantry of wine and anything of food that was in there. The pantry was meant for if a guest needed something last minute to cook instead of running to the store. The man who booked the house had left 2 days earlier than the other 2 families who completely trashed it. He was understandable and they never got the security deposit back. Story 41. I know a girl that did it and guests broke her globe and glued it back together with all the wrong countries joined together. They also spilled a pint of water on the rug and just left it, which made a big circle watermark on the wooden floor. She was a bit fussy about hygiene, so I was surprised that she didn't mind loads of strangers doing all sorts in her bed. It is baffling. Clearly, the lure of money is great for some people. Story 42. I'm not old enough to rent a home, but this comes from my dad. Short and simple, when we came back home, we found a lot of blood in the kitchen and a cut-off thumb. And my dad's bedroom smelt like someone had sex for at least 2 hours. Story 43. Former next-door neighbor was renting out their apartment on Airbnb. You can do that in a rental. One of the first set of guests would blasted the stereo till all hours of the night and left the apartment trashed. Another set of guests would fight all the time. They got into a screaming match and another neighbor called the cops on them. The worst, though, was the entitled couple who insisted my apartment was their rental. They walked in on me watching TV in nothing but my underwear. I had to physically shove them out my door, and they had the nerve to call the cops on me. Thank God, the landlord finally put the kibosh on tenants renting to Airbnb. Story 44. One woman complained that it was dusty asterisk underneath asterisk the furniture. She also left a scathing review calling me a devil worshiper because she found Harry Potter books on the bookshelf. Another man threw away all the decorations he didn't like. He had booked 3 months, but that still doesn't mean you get to throw my stuff away. I discovered them in the trash when he canceled his 3-month reservation after 4 days, and then tried, and failed, to get a full refund. Another couple decided to take a break from packing their car to leave, so they could have sex one last time. The police knocked on my door because the car was illegally parked due to the packing, so I had to go upstairs and interrupt them in the middle of ducking to let them know the cops were looking for them. Story 45. My mother owns a cleaning business which services 4 B&Bs usually weekly. She also helps the owner out with other small matters. Just last week, a woman called and complained there was blood on the kitchen bench. She demanded compensation or a free stay IDK. My mom offered to go check out what was going on and on arrival found a man with blood trickling from his mouth. She then found a couple of teeth in the bin, some people. Also, multiple times the B&Bs have been used as 18-plus movie sets. Story 46. Hosted what we thought was a family of 4 for a long weekend. Turned out to be a couple of party planners who invited 280 people, according to the police report filed that night, and left nearly every room and fixture with some type of damage. Also found several types of drug paraphernalia and broken glass all around the house. The worst part is that they had invited 3 huge dudes to literally prevent us, homeowners, or any neighbors from meeting with the people whose names were on the reservation or going inside that night, leading neighbors and then us to call the cops later on. This is in a generally quiet neighborhood with a ton of families and retirees. Story 47. I wish I could host, but these stories remind me of one of my visits. One year on a family trip to Iceland, we rented a beautiful cabin on the edge of a lake. Definitely one of the most amazing places I've ever stayed. We left our father alone in the kitchen one night and we all sort of gathered back there at the same time when we started noticing a strange chemical smell. Turns out he had put the electric kettle on the stove. My dad is an engineer and didn't notice that it was an electric kettle. Burned off the entire bottom of the kettle, and when we came in, he had been trying to clean and cover the whole thing up so no one would notice. Story 48. Worth mentioning, I have two friends who own a few in a mountain town in SoCal. They say the cleanest and most respectful people are when they rent it to 18-plus movie companies. They say families will legitimately trash the place, yet the prawn companies always clean up. Story 49. Not an owner, but I stayed in a house and lay for a week. The owner kind of messed us around as the oven was broken for most of the week, and they left all their clothes in the drawers when we got there. After the stay, we left our review of 4 stars. I hate giving bad reviews, so I wanted to think of what other people would experience there, actually having an oven for the whole stay, etc. A week after we submitted the review, we got slapped with a $400 bill for pool heating. We later found out that the pool settings were locked behind a gate that we had no access to. We challenged the fee on Airbnb and never heard back from them at all. Story 50. When I was little, my parents renovated our house so that we lived on one half and the other half were separate guest rooms with entrances from the garden. One day, my mom gets a phone call from a worried person saying that they think a suicidal family member is staying at our guest house. My mom goes straight to the room to see the person hanging from the light structure in the middle of the room. I'm not quite sure how she dealt with it, as I was young and only heard of the story years later. But I know my mom called an ambulance and the person survived. We didn't keep the guest house open for much longer after that. Story 51. Man was mad that his wife said I was attractive, so he spent all weekend taking upper deckers in my toilets. That's when you remove the top of the toilet tank, take a dump, then close it back up. I practically invented that move in college. Story 52. 2 guys from Wales came in for the night. We made it clear that we only offered a room with a double bed to sleep in, and toilet, of course. So no parties and no disrespectful behavior. Found them the next day passed out in the kitchen where they puked in and over everything, even the plants. Even in the cat's litter box, it was awful. I kicked him out immediately. Story 53. First time we hosted some high schoolers through a party. The wood floors were covered in a layer of dried beer. Someone jumped from the top of the stairs, landing on the couch and breaking it in 2. Glass in the pool. Who knows what else. Another time, someone completely dismantled the surround sound speaker system and left a huge mess of tangled wires. Just why? Story 54. I rented out a room for a foreign couple arriving a day before check-in. They called me and asked why I was not opening the door. I was at work. To be a good host, I ended up leaving work to go home and clean the apartment, wash the sheets, and make everything ready. As it would take a couple of hours to get ready, I offered to buy the guest coffee in a local cafe while waiting. After a stressful day, I managed to get everything ready for the guest, and they could check in a day early. After all this, they still ended up giving me 1 star in check-in rating. Story 55. I have houses rented, not on Airbnb. One couple rented it to live there, but after a week and a half said they wanted to leave and asked for their entrance fee, which is used for safeguard of the owner if anything goes wrong. When I got there, they had already left and the house was full of trash, dirty dishes, and their kid used diapers, besides having broken several of the house belongings. Afterwards, they were very surprised on why I rejected their request for the fee. Story 56. We've had hundreds of guests and only one problem one. Couple came in for a festival and one of them leaned on the tub faucet drunkenly and snapped it off. Water started pouring full force into the tub. It was late at night and they didn't want to bother me, so they didn't tell me until about 15 hours later. My water bill was hundreds of dollars and I had to call an emergency plumber. Airbnb reimbursed me eventually, but it was a huge hassle to get paid. They wanted photos of the damage, but it was a pipe snapped off inside a wall. Note to other owners: get lots of pics and documentation before filing a repair claim. Story 57. Not my story, but my stepmom used to host an Airbnb and these 5 girls rent a room in the house for 3 nights. Now the house was about $10 a day to stay, and after those 3 nights they left and paid for their days. They left a big mess that included beer bottles, a hamster, I have no clue how, but she lived a good rest of her life because we took in the hamster in, her name was Lynn, banana roaches, and as leaky pipe. It was absolutely gross, and we stopped hosting Airbnb because of damage. Story 58. My stepmother's brother put their holiday home up for Airbnb last year, but only lasted for a couple weeks. Turns out their first customers was a couple of young female sex workers that were using his place as a brothel. They only found out when then cleaner popped around in the evening after reports of a very large amount of activity by their neighbors. Story 59. A couple rented my home and did an obscene amount of substances and flushed some left over down my toilet, which clogged it. Oh, they also stole my prescription painkillers. Story 60. My parents had an 18-year-old girl stay with 3 U.S. Army boys she'd never met prior. Found condoms in the bin, fridge, pool, water fountain, garden, nightstand, and the kicker, one hanging on the chandelier. Story 61. Before the COVID, we rented both our spare rooms as Airbnb. The worst that has happened to us was a girl got a little glitter on the bathroom floor, and a guest cooked their vegan dinner, and the place smelled like a lentil's ass for a couple hours. Story 62. Once I rented an Airbnb and didn't understand that help yourself to anything didn't include the expensive booze. Turns out I drank a $500 dollar bottle of scotch that the owner's dead dad brought back from the moon or something. I paid for it, but felt like ass. Story 63. Other way around. But one time, me and my family stayed at an Airbnb in Canada and left it completely spotless, almost perfect. Better than how we found it, but they left us a bad review and refused to give us our deposit back. Story 64. My stepdad does Airbnb, and one time, he took a lady's son out fishing on his boat for free, and she rated him 3 stars for the house looking bigger in the pictures, even though the scour footage was listed on the page. Story 65. We rent a cabin in Caribbean on a pretty large property which we work on and are building houses. The guests invited strangers to camp on the property with no permission and got upset when we asked them to pay for their guests. Story 66. My aunt rented out her house through Airbnb. The tenants were employees of a Canadian 18-plus movies company. They shot a video in every room of her house. Story 67. Not me, but my landlady, who doesn't have Reddit, says once she rented out her house and it was covered in blood, even some splattering on the ceiling. She showed photos for proof. Story 68. Not Airbnb host, but my friend's place was robbed clean. All the furniture, electronics, paintings, garage door motor gone. Their home insurance policy also didn't cover for tenancies, so boned. Story 69. 16. M. I went camping and my family rented out my room on Airbnb. Bunch of people checked into my room. They hotboxed it overnight, disabled our smoke alarms, and got their asses kicked out at sunrise. Story 70. Not my place, but my brother-in-law's. Couple rented the place for one night and broke into the locked alcohol cabinet. They consumed, or at least got rid of, over $600 worth of high-quality liquor.